For years, the spotlight danced around Princess Anne, known as the steely anchor of the monarchy. But what if the true force behind her resilience was someone the palace never intended you to notice? In a move that stunned insiders and reignited decades-old tensions, King Charles has conferred an unprecedented title upon Anne's husband, quietly changing the royal hierarchy forever. Why now? And what does this mean for the monarchy's future? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. He was the man always one step behind, walking at a respectful distance, speaking rarely, and disappearing into the shadows of Anne's commanding presence. Sir Timothy Lawrence, a former Royal Navy officer, was long dismissed by the public and press as a quiet consort, not quite royal, not quite relevant. While Anne garnered respect as the tireless workhorse of the firm, Timothy existed as a ghost in royal coverage, absent from headlines, missing from commemorations, rarely mentioned even in passing. And yet, those closest to the inner circle knew that behind Anne's stoic facade stood a man whose quiet loyalty had withstood the tests of scandal, silence, and shifting thrones. When King Charles stood before the gathered press and, with a steady voice, announced the conferral of a new title upon Sir Timothy, there was a collective breath held across Britain and disbelief inside Buckingham itself. No royal observers had predicted this. No briefings were issued in advance. No leaks had prepared the tabloids. The words were crisp, carefully chosen, and utterly irreversible. A new title created solely for Timothy was to be inserted into the lineage of royal honours, not hereditary, not ceremonial, but symbolically potent. And with that, the air changed inside the monarchy's gilded halls. Within minutes, newsrooms scrambled for context. Social media exploded with speculation. Was this a sign of King Charles reaffirming his bond with his sister? Was this payback for private loyalties long unspoken? Or, as some darker corners of the internet mused, was this a prelude to a deeper power reshuffle? Royal commentators, caught off guard, hesitated to interpret. The title was unlike any bestowed in recent history, and its implications were deliberately vague. The public was left with more questions than answers, and that uncertainty sparked a firestorm. Behind the palace gates, the shockwave struck hard. Camilla, reportedly in mid-preparation for a state dinner, was said to have been handed the press release by a senior aide and remained silent for several minutes. The Queen's office offered no immediate comment, an omission that spoke volumes. Several senior royals reportedly felt completely blindsided, not just by the act itself, but by the manner in which it was executed without consultation, without warning, and above all, without precedent. Even those accustomed to Charles's newfound assertiveness were left reeling. But inside Clarence House, staff whispered of a late-night drafting session only days before the announcement. A royal decree, signed past midnight, was allegedly hand-delivered to the Sovereign Council in a velvet pouch. Sources claim it was marked with the crimson seal reserved for internal legacy realignments. A term not seen since the days of Elizabeth's private codicils. That Charles acted so swiftly, so unilaterally, has raised questions about what pressures he may be responding to, or what secrets he is finally bringing to light. The title may have been public, but its meaning felt hidden in layers of history, family loyalty, and unspoken promises. And while the cameras focused on Timothy's bowed head and composed expression, those who truly understood the monarchy saw the tremor underneath. Because this wasn't just about recognition, it was about succession, allegiance, and a royal order quietly shifting beneath the surface. But to understand the gravity of this royal upheaval, we must peel back the layers of history and uncover the silent war waged behind Buckingham's gates for nearly 3 decades. Before he was Anne's stoic companion, Sir Timothy Lawrence served at the epicenter of Britain's naval intelligence, but buried within his classified past lie operations so delicate they were redacted even from royal briefings. What did King Charles discover inside those long-forgotten files, and why did they suddenly resurface weeks before this shocking title was granted? Long before royal protocol and ceremonial bows, Timothy was a man with access to corridors that made no headlines. His Royal Navy career was more than ceremonial. He was stationed in the nerve center of the Ministry of Defense, where intelligence flowed like electric current. According to insiders, Timothy was part of high-level strategic briefings during volatile international standoffs, trusted with operations few officers ever even heard of. Whispers among retired Admiralty commanders spoke of a mission so covert its files were coded under sovereign shield, a name no one dared utter outside the classified perimeter. For decades, that file remained untouched, locked away in an archive reportedly immune, even to parliamentary oversight, until now. 3 weeks before King Charles publicly bestowed the unprecedented title, a quiet visit was arranged. The monarch, accompanied by only 2 aides, met with a group of former naval chiefs in a secure chamber beneath the Admiralty building. No photographs, no press releases, no records. But according to one anonymous source, what was revealed during that gathering changed everything. Operation Sovereign Shield, they claimed, had shielded not just the crown, but the very stability of Britain from a diplomatic scandal that could have shattered royal alliances. The man credited with neutralizing the threat, Commander Timothy Lawrence. It was a chapter erased from the public record and kept that way by design. The timing of its revelation is no coincidence. As Charles grapples with a monarchy weighed down by internal fractures and fading trust, the decision to elevate Anne's husband begins to look less like sentiment and more like strategic gratitude. A symbolic act, yes, but perhaps also recognition of invisible service. Was the newly granted title not just a gift of honor, but repayment for a debt only Charles and a handful of men in uniform understood? The question quickly morphed into speculation. Had Timothy held this story back out of loyalty, or had Anne herself insisted it never be told? Further complicating the mystery is the alleged existence of Appendix Windsor 4, a shadow chapter of royal protocol said to be locked inside the Royal High Council archives. Reserved for monarchs and their immediate constitutional deputies, this document supposedly outlines extraordinary scenarios where non-blood royals could be honored with elevated roles for acts deemed to have preserved the sovereignty of the realm. Some believe this appendix was dusted off for the first time in decades in the lead-up to Timothy's recognition. And if that's true, it begs a chilling question: what other names have been written into its pages, and what crises have been buried to protect them? But perhaps the most telling reaction came from Anne herself. Those present when the file was unsealed described her expression as unreadable, stone cold, bordering on distressed. When asked about her husband's role in the operation, she reportedly replied, "That chapter was never meant for daylight." Was she protecting her husband, her mother's legacy, or something far deeper in the royal bloodline? The silence from her camp since the title was granted has only fueled speculation that whatever was hidden in those files was as much about preserving the institution as it was about recognizing individual courage. And as the world rushed to interpret this symbolic elevation, behind palace walls, old wounds were being reopened, and some were bleeding far deeper than the public realized. No one challenges the status quo without retaliation, and Queen Camilla was never one to let her influence slip quietly. Mere hours after Timothy's title was announced, she summoned the royal trustees to a closed-door midnight session. What was discussed has never been officially disclosed, but sources say it was a declaration of war. Inside royal circles, timing is everything, and the swiftness of Camilla's reaction said more than any public statement ever could. The announcement of Sir Timothy's title wasn't just a royal footnote, it was a seismic shift. Charles had bypassed the traditional consultative routes, had ignored the unspoken rule of deference to the Queen Consort's court, and in doing so, he'd left Camilla exposed. Those closest to her described the atmosphere as electric, volatile. A senior aide reportedly whispered she felt betrayed, not just blindsided, but humiliated. Within hours, a confidential directive was dispatched to the royal trustees, calling them to an emergency session in the palace's Blue Room under the pretense of a constitutional clarification summit. But the truth, as later leaks would suggest, was far more sinister. The meeting, held under cover of darkness, was cloaked in procedural formality, but behind those closed doors, Camilla allegedly launched a calculated effort to halt the momentum behind Timothy's elevation. According to one insider present at the meeting, the Queen demanded a full review of the decree's constitutional legitimacy. "We do not crown shadows," she is reported to have said, her voice cold and unshaken. Legal advisors were told to examine historical precedents, while palace archivists were quietly tasked with tracing any loopholes that could justify the rescindment or revision of Charles's order. Some even claim she floated the idea of a temporary moratorium on future titles, an unprecedented move designed solely to isolate Timothy's elevation. But not everyone in the room was aligned. Tensions escalated as it became clear that even within the House of Clarence, loyalties were split. A faction of younger advisors, those who had aligned themselves with William and Catherine reportedly, refused to support Camilla's push. In hushed voices, they called the title earned and symbolically overdue. This division was not lost on Camilla, who, for all her resilience, recognized the fracture lines forming beneath her own feet. It was during this very session that the Queen's secretary was spotted delivering a document stamped in crimson Windsor Crisis Protocol, a code phrase not seen since the darkest days of the Diana aftermath. Meanwhile, the corridors buzzed with rumor and coded messages. A leaked text from one of Camilla's aides chillingly read, "We must reassert precedence before it reasserts itself." The phrase echoed through royal offices like a battle cry, a clear sign that Camilla wasn't merely reacting, she was strategizing. And then, in a move that sent the press into a tailspin, two of the Queen's highly publicized appearances, one at a state arts gala, another at a diplomatic reception, were quietly cancelled without explanation. No reason was offered, no replacement sent. The silence, calculated or not, was thunderous. The move to honor Timothy had lit a fire under decades of carefully managed equilibrium, and Camilla's response was not simply resistance. It was the first maneuver in what many began calling the precedence war, a subtle, high-stakes chess match, not of crowns and jewels, but of roles, rituals and influence. And while the Queen consort plotted in silence, far from the public eye, a long-buried chapter in Anne's life was about to be dragged into daylight. But as Camilla prepared her next move in silence, the public was about to be drawn into a revelation that would shatter everything they thought they knew about Princess Anne's marriage. She's the royal who never complains, never explains. But on this day, Anne did both. In a rare breach of tradition, she walked straight into the press briefing room without palace clearance and delivered a statement that left even her fiercest critics speechless. For the first time, the Iron Princess let the world into her private battle. There was no royal standard raised, no palace script handed to aides, no ceremonial delay. Just Anne, unflanked, walking into the light with a silence that felt heavier than 1,000 headlines. Those in the room say it was the most human they had ever seen her, composed, but visibly strained, her jaw clenched not in anger, but restraint. She didn't open with a formal address. Instead, she went straight to the core. "This isn't about tradition," she said. "It's about truth." Her voice, though clear, carried the weight of decades that had gone unspoken. What followed was a confession the monarchy never expected, and perhaps never wanted to hear. She spoke of years lived in the margins, a husband who stood beside her through storms the public never witnessed. "Timothy has given more to this institution than most will ever know," she declared, her tone cutting through the stillness like a blade. "He served in silence, endured scrutiny without defense, and sacrificed without recognition. There was no grand gesture, no flourish, only brutal, emotional honesty." She called the new title long overdue and deeply personal, emphasizing that it was not about rank or power, but about the restoration of dignity long denied. Then came the line that sent chills across the kingdom. "There are classified chapters of our service to the crown," she said, "that history may never read, but the cost of them was paid in silence, ours." It was when she began speaking of betrayal that her composure began to crack. Her voice wavered not from weakness, but from wounds too deep to hide. "We endured betrayals," she said, her eyes locked on the gathered cameras, "and we endured them without retaliation, without scandal, without public pity. We did it because we believed in the crown, even when the crown did not believe in us." A hushed gasp echoed in the room. It was not a criticism, it was a reckoning. a reckoning with a system that had taken their loyalty and offered little in return. Within minutes of the footage airing, headlines detonated like landmines across media outlets. Anne goes rogue. The princess has spoken. Is she protecting him or warning us? For a family built on silence, Anne's voice had become the loudest, and yet, inside the palace, it caused immediate panic. Sources from the Sovereign Communications Office confirmed that her statement was not pre-approved, nor was it even known in advance. One aide was, quote, "Ed as saying, the last time we saw anything like this, it ended with abdication." But Anne wasn't abdicating. She was reclaiming and daring the monarchy to catch up with her. Yet while Anne faced the world head-on, another faction of the royal household was quietly mobilizing unearthing relics from a time the firm had tried desperately to forget. Inside a leather-bound box locked deep within the Balmoral vault, royal staff discovered something even Charles hadn't anticipated: sealed envelopes bearing Queen Elizabeth II's signature and addressed to Anne and Timothy directly. What lay inside those letters would reframe not only a marriage, but the monarchy's entire past. The discovery was not part of any scheduled archive review. It came during a routine security audit of Balmoral's East Vault, a wing so restricted that only a handful of archivists had ever stepped inside. Among the ordinary ledgers and ceremonial artifacts sat a small, dust-covered case wrapped in the Queen's personal monogrammed ribbon. Inside, 3 envelopes, 2 marked for Anne and Timothy, and 1 marked for eyes of the sovereign only. The courier summoned to deliver the letters to Windsor wasn't the usual dispatch. He was hand-picked, discreet, and personally briefed by the keeper of the royal archives. By the time the letters arrived in Anne's private quarters, she was already aware. A former equerry, now retired, said, "She knew something had been left behind, but not like this. What those letters contained would never be publicly released." But through whispers and insider fragments, the narrative began to unfold. In her unmistakable handwriting, Elizabeth spoke of Timothy not as a peripheral consort, but as a sentinel to the crown. His silence, she allegedly wrote, was as valuable to the realm as any sword drawn in its name. She referred to moments of danger never disclosed, to decisions made behind closed doors that preserved not just royal dignity, but national stability. And then came the most damning sentence of all, a line that reportedly left Anne in tears. "When the time comes, let him stand beside you with the honor I could not give in life." This revelation sent tremors through Charles's inner circle. The king had long believed he understood his mother's intentions, but this was beyond ceremony. It was a command from beyond the grave, a royal instruction sealed in personal conviction, yet to honor it would mean confronting decades of public narratives, of snubs, of quiet distancing from Timothy's name in official registers. A long, deliberate silence that would have to be rewritten in the glare of the public eye. Some courtiers feared the optics. Others warned it would open the door to questions about other overlooked figures. But the emotional weight was undeniable. Edward and Sophie, never ones to meddle in matters beyond their station, were reportedly among the first to urge Charles to act. Edward, having known both Anne and Timothy since their earliest days, reminded the king of a different era, one in which duty and discretion weren't rewarded with medals, but isolation. He allegedly said, "You cannot leave that letter unanswered. Not now. Not after everything." The final push came in the form of a single line, buried in the Queen's eyes-only letter. A reference to the Clarion Clause, an obscure constitutional provision believed by many to be more myth than law. Used only in circumstances where the monarch required protection by an unofficial but critical figure, it gave the sovereign the authority to create a symbolic title in recognition of concealed acts of loyalty that could not be made public. If invoked, it would bypass normal Privy Council channels entirely. For Charles, the choice was no longer just personal, it had become historical. But just as the letters cast Timothy in a new light, a figure long out of the spotlight re-emerged with a warning that would shift the battlefield once more. When Prince Andrew called a private audience with King Charles, no one expected him to speak of Anne's husband. but insiders claim he delivered a dossier, one that could either bolster Timothy's new honor or unravel it entirely. Is this a power play for personal leverage, or a final attempt at royal redemption? The request came unexpectedly and, to many, suspiciously timed. In the midst of the palace adjusting to the emotional weight of Queen Elizabeth's letters and Anne's unfiltered statement, Andrew resurfaced not through press, not through whispers, but with a formal petition for an audience with the king. What followed was a tightly sealed meeting behind the green doors of Clarence House, where Andrew arrived alone, carrying a leather case rumoured to have been retrieved from a former naval archive in Portsmouth. Its contents? According to two senior aides, a series of naval logs and correspondences from the 1980s documents that allegedly involved Timothy Lawrence's early postings and communications that had never appeared in official Ministry of Defence files. The implications were instantly unsettling. While the monarchy had just begun crafting a narrative of heroism and silent service around Timothy's legacy, Andrew's dossier introduced doubt, questions of inconsistency, alleged omissions in timeline reporting, and vague hints that Timothy's actions during a specific maritime crisis may have deviated from official command protocols. "If you crown ghosts," Andrew is said to have told his brother, "they will come back to haunt you." It was more than a warning. It was a threat dressed in royal etiquette. Whether Andrew sought to protect the crown or disrupt it is a question that still lingers unanswered. Inside the corridors of power, the tension was immediate. Advisors split into factions, some calling the move opportunistic blackmail, others demanding an internal investigation. Anne, who had been briefly absent from public view, was seen arriving at Clarence House 48 hours later alone, with clenched fists and storm in her stride. According to palace insiders, she entered without speaking to aides and left 30 minutes later without acknowledging anyone. What was said behind those walls remains unknown, but what followed was undeniable. The formal confirmation of Timothy's new title, originally scheduled for release the following week, was suddenly delayed. Charles, pressed for a reason, offered only that the matter required final review. To the public, this meant nothing. To the palace, it meant war. Rumours spiralled that Andrew's documents had triggered an emergency review by the Lord Chamberlain. A special session of legal advisers was reportedly convened to determine whether the material held any legitimate weight, or was merely a bluff meant to unsettle a narrative already in motion. Some believe Andrew was seeking leverage to negotiate his own reintegration into royal circles, a transactional gesture, cloaked in feigned concern. Others suspect deeper resentment, a long-buried rivalry with Anne finally finding its moment to strike. And yet, beneath all the scandal, another fear began to whisper through palace halls. What if Andrew wasn't bluffing? What if the story the monarchy had just begun to honour wasn't the complete story at all? For a brief, dangerous moment, the very foundation of Timothy's title hung in the balance, not because of his deeds, but because of the shadows others were willing to cast over them. As the dust settled from Andrew's veiled accusations, one unexpected voice would pierce through the storm, and it would come from inside the heart of the monarchy itself. Catherine had warned him to stay neutral, but Prince William had seen enough. In a moment that surprised even his closest aides, he stepped into the palace briefing chamber and delivered an unscripted, impassioned defense of Anne and her husband. For the first time, the heir to the throne declared where the future would stand. It was meant to be a day of silence. The palace had called for calm, behind-the-scenes reconciliation, and no further statements until the situation with Timothy's title had been fully assessed. But when Prince William strode into the chamber without advance notice and stood before the press corps, protocol evaporated. His voice did not shake, his tone did not waver. He began by stating what no one else dared to say aloud. In this family there are those who serve in the light and those who serve in the silence. Sir Timothy Lawrence has done both. The room froze. Advisers scrambled behind the scenes, yet William continued, unmoved and uncensored. He called Anne the soul of our institution, praising her for her constancy, integrity, and unparalleled commitment. Then he turned slowly to what had become the sorest nerve in the royal body, the fracture between generations. "This monarchy cannot afford a war between its elders and its heirs," he said. "It cannot survive a house divided by whispers, suspicion, and withheld honor." There was no mistaking the target. It wasn't just Camilla, it was every royal faction that had attempted to downplay, delay, or discredit Timothy's elevation. William wasn't seeking permission. He was drawing a line in the royal sand. Behind that line, quietly but powerfully, stood Catherine. Palace sources later confirmed that portions of the speech had been crafted during late-night discussions between the Princess of Wales and Anne herself. It was Catherine who had encouraged William T. Oh, speak plainly. It was Catherine who told him, "Loyalty is no longer quiet, it must be visible." And so, when he stood before the press that morning, he wasn't just speaking as the future king, he was anchoring the institution to a different moral compass, one rooted not in hierarchy but in character. Camilla's office, caught off guard, released a terse, formal response just 3 hours later. It offered no endorsement, no condemnation. Simply a reminder that matters of protocol remain under review by His Majesty's team. But behind that polished wording was a boiling silence. Internal reports revealed rising tension. Camilla's senior aides considered William's statement a breach. Others feared it was the beginning of a generational power shift that would not be undone. Charles, meanwhile, was said to be deeply moved, torn between the stability of tradition and the undeniable momentum of change. For days he had remained in quiet deliberation, isolated in Windsor's private wing, grappling with the sudden complexity that the title had unleashed. William's words, according to one courtier, recentered the conversation. It wasn't about what Timothy had done, it was about what the monarchy needed to become. By the following morning, public opinion had shifted drastically. Polls showed overwhelming support for Anne and Timothy, with headlines reading, "William breaks the silence," "Future King backs the Iron Princess," and "A monarchy reborn." But for all the approval, the battle inside the palace was far from over. The words had been spoken, the loyalties declared, but one voice had yet to speak. And it would not be the voice of a king. But while the family tried to recalibrate behind closed doors, the final chapter would be written not by the king, but by the man himself. The room was silent as he stepped forward. No fanfare, no royal trumpets, just the echo of footstep, down a centuries-old corridor. And then Sir Timothy Lawrence raised his hand, not as the man behind the princess, but as the crown's newly titled High Protector of Royal Integrity, a title never heard before and perhaps never meant to exist. It was not a state ceremony. There were no foreign dignitaries, no broadcast feed, no eager press corps waiting outside. This was a moment for the soul of the monarchy, not its image. In a small chamber lined with centuries of history, Sir Timothy took his oath with only 5 witnesses, each bearing the weight of the institution on their shoulders. Anne, unmoving but clearly trembling beneath the surface. Charles, whose expression carried both resolve and regret. William and Catherine standing together as if anchoring the future. And Lady Louise, her presence subtle yet profoundly symbolic. A nod to the generational bridge quietly forming behind palace walls. As Timothy's voice echoed through the still air, the full title was spoken aloud for the first time, High Protector of Royal Integrity. It was not ceremonial, nor was it hereditary. It was a role rooted in principle, tasked with safeguarding the moral memory of the monarchy, overseeing the integrity of its records, and preserving the ethical compass of its most hidden history. The role would be inscribed into the elusive Appendix Windsor IV, a part of royal protocol long rumoured to hold special directives for times of moral crisis. With that inscription, Timothy's oath became more than symbolic. It became law, royal law recorded into the Crown's private constitutional fabric. As he concluded the oath, Anne, known for her steel composure and legendary restraint, allowed a single tear to escape. It was not performative, it was not political, it was personal. A lifetime of silence, resilience, and sacrifice had culminated in that single moment of validation, not just for Timothy, but for everything they had weathered together. For decades, Anne had endured the quiet marginalization of her partner. In that chamber, she finally watched the narrative realign not by force, but by recognition. Camilla did not attend. Her absence was not questioned, but it was undeniably felt. Whatever justification her team offered behind palace doors, schedule conflicts, privacy considerations, one truth lingered in the air. Her silence had become a statement. The divide, however veiled, was now irrevocably visible. In an unexpected gesture of symbolism, it was Catherine who stepped forward at the conclusion of the oath and placed in Timothy's hand an ancestral signet ring retrieved from a locked case in the Windsor archives, previously belonging to a royal advisor known only in classified records. The gesture, approved by Charles, was Catherine's way of anchoring the past to the future, acknowledging Timothy not as an outsider elevated, but as a keeper of what must now be preserved. Charles's public statement followed shortly after. It was brief, but powerful. This honor is not only for loyalty, it is for unseen valor, for those who guard what cannot be spoken of, and who serve without asking to be seen. It was the king's final seal, a quiet declaration that sometimes the most royal of duties are the ones history never writes. But just as the crown attempted to close this emotional chapter, whispers of a deeper royal reset began to rise, one that could redraw the monarchy's map altogether. A single word coded across an internal royal dispatch, clarion. For those within the royal secretariat, it signaled the beginning of a hidden plan set decades ago, and at its helm, not just Princess Anne, but now officially Sir Timothy Lawrence. Together they weren't stepping back from power, they were stepping deeper into its command core. For years, whispers of Project C, Larian, had circled among palace aides, but its nature was always kept deliberately vague, classified under emergency governance protocol, and rarely mentioned outside the sovereign's private circle. But after the events surrounding Timothy's historic elevation, a long-dormant directive was quietly reactivated. Hidden among stacks of archival material and buried within Appendix Windsor 4, Project Clarion was designed to be implemented only under conditions of extreme institutional fragility, conditions which, behind the gilded facade, many now feared had arrived. In a decisive but covert move, Charles reappointed Anne and Timothy not simply as royal figureheads, but as Clarion operatives tasked with guiding the monarchy through periods of turbulence, where traditional structures may falter. Their mandate, according to internal documents, included oversight of the High Council's emergency protocols, stewardship of the royal archives during periods of potential transition, and discreet diplomatic engagement should the sovereign or heir become compromised. In short, they were appointed not as ornamental elders, but as strategic custodians. This wasn't retirement, this was recalibration. The very architecture of the monarchy was being restructured in the shadows, with Anne and Timothy entrusted as the inner circuit, through which contingency would silently flow. Sources inside Clarence House confirmed that King Charles had, without announcement, transferred operational control of several minor but symbolically powerful institutions to Clarion Command. These included the Royal Collection's private ledger wing, the ceremonial code vault at Holyrood, and most notably the Sovereign Reserve Office, a department responsible for logistical continuity in the event of royal displacement. These transfers weren't made for efficiency, they were made for preservation. Charles was building a firewall around the monarchy, and Anne and Timothy were now its architects. Prince William and Princess Catherine were reportedly briefed in private, in what one senior aide described as a future-focused alignment of duty and destiny. While they will eventually take the throne, the Clarion framework ensures that behind the scenes, a seasoned protective force is already at work, discreet, unshakable, and embedded with institutional memory that can withstand any public or political quake. And while much remains classified, some insiders claim that the Clarion Directive includes long-view succession roles for both Lady Louise and Prince George, subtle indicators that the monarchy's future is being sculpted not just through bloodline, but through loyalty, discretion, and trusted moral resilience. In hushed circles, palace officials have already begun to use a new phrase when describing the post-Clarion era. The monarchy didn't just survive, it recalibrated. Because what began as a symbolic honor for a quiet husband has now unfolded into a comprehensive reshaping of royal authority itself. The Clarion signal wasn't an end, it was activation. And if you thought this was the final chapter, think again. Because in the Royal House of Windsor, The real power is often hidden behind the silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.